I got the title of Closer Cop when I was working the beat with our local police department. I was the new kid on the block. All of the other officers were old-timers and pretty much set in their ways. They were a great group of guys, and they all went out of their way to help me learn the ropes, but they were all far from being go-getters. I, on the other hand, was the quintessential go-getter. I used to take a cold case folder or two home with me and work on them in my spare time. I was taking a criminology class that was offered by the state college 40 miles to our south. I used the new techniques that I was learning to revisit those old cases. As luck would have it, I solved 4 cold cases during my first 6 months on the beat. That was the upside. The downside was the 2 evenings a week away from Stella while I was in the classroom, but she was a very supportive wife. She knew that what I was learning now would pay off handsomely in the future. She was a nurse at our local hospital. They were short of nurses, so she was able to alter her schedule to maximize our time together. Both of us came from middle-class families. We had our future all figured out. We would buy a house with some acreage so we could do some gardening, have horses, and maybe some other livestock. We would have 2 or 3 kids, but that would come after we'd spent a few years together with just the 2 of us. It was a great plan. It was our dream. To make a short story shorter, those 4 cold cases that I solved brought me to the attention of Sheriff Jim Stevenson. I found myself sitting in his office and listening to an amazing offer. He wanted me to work with his investigative group. For all intents and purposes, I would be a detective. The downside was that I would have to report to his office located at the county seat. Instead of an 11-mile round trip to work, I would be driving 27 miles. The upside was more money and my own assigned patrol vehicle to take home every night. I was also allowed to drive it to my criminology classes. The clincher was when they said they would pay me for the time I spent in the classroom and cover my tuition. Needless to say, as much as I hated to leave all of my colleagues and friends in the local police force, the sheriff gave me an offer that I couldn't refuse. The atmosphere at the county seat could only be called competitive. There was no doubt that my quick rise was resented by at least a few of my coworkers. I tried to keep a low profile while working more diligently than ever. Most of my time was spent on cold case assignments. Like before, I continued to work on those cases at home. I usually read everything that our office had available on a particular case, committing as much as possible to memory. Then, when I had some time or when a thought came to me, I entered it into my evidence app. At the end of the day, I transferred my thoughts to a USB drive to take with me to work the next day. It was that routine that led to something that changed everything. It started on a Wednesday morning when I couldn't find my USB stick. I looked everywhere. No stick. I was sure that I had left it on my desk, but it wasn't there. Then it dawned on me. It had probably been inadvertently nudged off of the desk and fallen into the wastebasket. The wastebasket was empty. Then I remembered that Stella had taken a white plastic bag of trash out of the bin last night. She had left for work already, so it fell to me to look through the trash to find my missing stick. I expected the white bag to stand out like a sore thumb among all of the black trash bags, but no such luck. I started the painstaking task of going through the bags. Finally, 3 rows deep, I found the white bag inside of a black bag. What the hell? Why did she put that bag inside of another bag? Why not just throw it on top? The good news is, my stick was there. The bad news is, it was not by itself. That sunny Wednesday morning, that hump day was about to become one of the darkest days of my life. After I put the USB stick in my pocket, I noticed a clear sandwich bag near the bottom. Inside the sandwich bag, I found 6 small bags, better known as condoms. It doesn't take a detective to realize that this was an important clue. It doesn't take a lab to identify it. It doesn't take a trusting husband long to know that his marriage and life as he knows it is probably over. I opened my patrol car and put the sack of condoms in my evidence cooler. Then I began to ponder my next move. My first inclination was an immediate confrontation, but Stella could just deny everything. She could say that the neighbor boys probably used our trash bin for nefarious purposes. I could counter that with the observation that the white bag contained other items that I had discarded from my desk. What are the chances that those boys would take the time to dig 3 levels deep in the bin, open one of our trash bags, and put their rubbish in a white sack that contained waste from my desk? Of course, she could fall back on a statement like, anything is possible when boys are hiding incriminating sexual evidence. I quickly determined that I would need to employ a more foolproof method. I would need to use professional surveillance equipment strategically placed in the house. That would allow me to determine if it was a one-off or an ongoing affair. I wasn't even sure that affair was the right word. With 6 full condoms, would orgy be a more appropriate word? Installing the appropriate equipment would allow me to identify not only the right word, but probably the participants too. I could have the condom contents DNA analyzed if that became necessary. I was making a list of what I would need to do when my phone rang. Deputy Jake Robbins, I answered. It was the boss, Sheriff Stevenson, calling to tell me about a possible breakthrough in one of our cold cases. He asked if I knew where Luke Young's ranch was located. When I replied that I'd been there several times, he told me that Luke had discovered Alice Reynolds' car on his property. Sheriff Stevenson asked me to get over there ASAP. He stated that he was putting me in charge of that now reopened cold case that had suddenly turned hot. This would be the first time in my 2 years as a deputy that I would be the lead investigator on a case. I was honored that the boss had chosen me to handle such a challenging and well-known case. As I headed for the ranch, my thoughts about a half-dozen condoms were replaced by memories of the day that Luke called me out of the blue. He wanted to discuss Holly Sherman's murder, which was another one of our cold cases. I scheduled a meeting with him later that day. It turned out to be very fortuitous. He stunned me with his opening sentence. He wanted to report that he had participated in a sex act with Holly Sherman and other 3 at her house. While I knew that such an activity could lead to murder, I had to tread lightly. Sexual activity, no matter how depraved, is usually not a crime. I asked him if it was consensual. He said she was a willing participant at first, but less so as the activities progressed. Saying that, he assured me that she had never asked them to stop or even pause. She had just lost her enthusiasm as time passed. He went on to say that it had bothered him so much that he finally confessed everything to his brother, who was the minister of a local church. His brother had advised him to seek me out and tell me what happened. I told him that I appreciated the information, but none of what he confessed to was illegal. Not as long as she was not being forced to have sex against her will. That's when he told me that the other 2 participants were Stephen Barber and Bill Raymore. Both he and Bill had been there at Stephen's invitation. I thought it was a little kinky that Stephen, who had been identified as Holly's boyfriend, would initiate such an act, but it was not a crime. I had to get to the meat of the situation, so I asked Luke if he had been involved in poisoning Holly. He said that he would never do such a thing. I asked him if he suspected that the other participants could have been involved in her murder. He stated that he had no reason to think so. At that point, I figured the call was just an attempt by Luke to clear his conscience and wouldn't have much impact on our cold case. So, it had been an interesting conversation, but it hadn't moved the needle in Holly's murder. Wrong. I had interrogated Stephen, Holly's boyfriend, early in the case and ruled him out. I was also satisfied that, while Luke was bent out of shape about what happened, he didn't rise to the level of a suspect. All that remained for me to check out was the other participant, Bill Raymore. I made a note to self to run checks on him tomorrow. The next day I ran exhaustive checks on Mr. Raymore. Outside of some evidence that he was not a nice guy, there was nothing to implicate him in the murder. It was when I started checking out his wife, Ellie Raymore, that I struck gold. Before they moved here a year ago, she had worked for a chemical company on the Gulf Coast. After some phone conversations with managers and supervisors at the plant where she had worked, I had my suspect. She had access to the very chemical that the medical examiner had identified as being the cause of Holly's death. The managers at the chemical plant said that while they kept a close watch on products that could be used recreationally, they were not so concerned about poisonous byproducts like the one I was asking about. Just 3 days after my visit with Luke, I was part of a team sent out to confront Ellie Raymore. We came prepared with a warrant to search her house. She met us at the door. When I showed my badge and told her that we were charging her in the murder of Holly Sherman, she surprised us all. "I was wondering when you would figure this out," she smirked. "Just let me say this, that self-righteous 304 deserved what she got." Just like that, thanks to my visit with Luke Young, we had thawed an ice-cold case. I got most of the credit, but it actually belonged to Luke. Now, here I am preparing to talk to Luke again. It's about another cold case. This one is probably the most talked about case we've ever had. It's all about an older woman named Alice Reynolds and a young man named Jerry Gibson disappearing on the same evening. She had been his teacher in a special junior college program designed to teach mentally challenged young men how to handle the duties of the man of the house. Her teaching was performed at the residence that she shared with her husband, Alan. There was much speculation at the time about a student and his teacher disappearing on the same day. Had they become romantically involved? Did they go somewhere to be together? Or was it just a super strange coincidence? Those questions had never been answered, and the case soon went cold. Today could mark a new start in solving that mystery. Wouldn't it be something if Luke could contribute to this case as he did in Holly Sherman's case? If so, we should consider putting him on the payroll. As I drove up to Luke's house, the CSI vehicles came in from the other direction. Luke came out to meet us. As we shook hands and handled introductions, the CSI team leader asked if the car was readily accessible. Luke told them it was hidden in plain sight. He reminded us that the multi-vehicle dealership that he ran now had been in the family for years. It had been a Ford agency until the recent expansion. During all those years, they had traded for many vehicles. They sold some on their used car lot and sent some to the auction, but many of them ended up on a car graveyard in the middle of their ranch. Quite often collectors would come out to view those vehicles. It was one of those collectors that had remarked about the nearly new car that was among all of those classic vehicles. He had asked how much they were asking for that 2-year-old white Buick. Luke drove out to take a look. The doors were locked, but the license plates were still in place. He made a quick call, asked a quick question, and was astonished at the answer. He made another call. He called the sheriff. After hearing Luke's story, we followed him to the car. 10 minutes after we reached the car, the CSI team had the doors and trunk open. They found a couple of empty drink cups in the holders, but the car seemed to be light on clues. There was no blood or other significant findings. Most importantly, there weren't any bodies. I asked Luke to think about any place on the ranch where bodies could be hidden. He searched his memory for a couple of minutes. Then his eyes lit up as he remembered that there was an old hand-dug well nearby. The CSI unit soon determined that the water in the well was at least 12 feet deep. They suspended another machine above the well. The operator was studying the picture on a scope. After a few minutes of analysis, he turned to us and said, "We have 2 bodies down there." I immediately called the boss with the news. He congratulated us and said he would make some calls. He needed to put a team together to retrieve the bodies. Hopefully, they could be in place by tomorrow. He told me to report to the ranch tomorrow at sunrise. The team would report to me as soon as they arrived. I thanked him for his confidence in me. Crime scene tape was placed around both the well and the car before we left for home. I was anticipating a very full day tomorrow, but my thoughts soon returned to 6 condoms. Since my duties were done for the day, I had 2 extra hours to do some shopping. I stopped by the electronics store on my way home. I left with 4 audio and video-equipped smoke detectors. They looked exactly like the ones they would replace in our house. I also had a base station to record the evidence from those devices. I arrived at the house over an hour before Stella would be home. I used the time wisely. All of the devices were in place when she arrived. I would soon know the answer to the 6 condom mystery. It could be nothing, or it could be the end of my marriage. When Stella got home, I covered any condom-related anxiety I was feeling by talking about being assigned as the lead detective in the now reopened case where a teacher and her student had disappeared simultaneously. Stella seemed very interested in all that happened at the ranch. I watched her closely all evening, but saw nothing out of the ordinary in her behavior. She was relaxed, happy, and loving. She showed no signs of guilt or remorse. I began to wonder if the condoms did actually come from the neighbor boys. I spent several hours that evening refreshing my memory about the Alice and Jerry case. I always suspected that the 2 of them had a sexual relationship. As I was reading the case files, I discovered a memo from the school administrator that mentioned Jerry asking Alice to help him with issues related to dating girls. I knew right then that he had maneuvered her into dangerous territory. After digesting every piece of evidence in the file, I concluded that Alice had finally figured out that she was in way too deep with Jerry. He had turned a teacher or student relationship into a sexual relationship. It had become a danger to her whole family if it should ever be exposed to the light of day. She knew what she had to do and she did it. When bedtime arrived, I was determined to make love to Stella. I needed to see how she would respond to me. It turned out that she was not into it very much. Her mind seemed to be somewhere else. I'm sure that she faked it. She made the right sounds and said the right words, but her body spoke differently. Also, her breathing was not following her normal pattern. Her actions confirmed my suspicions. Now it was the hidden devices that would tell the tale. Now that I think about it, her ardor has been decreasing for a month or so. I hadn't given it much thought until now. Those condoms had put me on high alert. I decided to make this night a twofer. We didn't go twice very often anymore, but I wanted to see if she would rebuff me. She didn't, but her participation in that second event was even more lackadaisical than her first performance. We usually enjoyed at least 15 minutes of afterglow, but this time after our sex, I jumped out of bed and headed for the bathroom. When I returned to bed, I turned my back to her. She reached for me, but I didn't respond. I spent Thursday watching the assembled team recover the bodies, which they took to the lab to complete the identification process. I talked to the CSI team at length, and they were convinced that it was a murder or suicide situation. We agreed on that and every other aspect of the case. It was finally over. I was about an hour late getting home that evening since I had several reports to file and needed to participate in a preliminary press briefing. The boss gave me Friday off as a reward for solving the case. When I got home that night, I explained the day's activities to Stella, but I didn't tell her about my reward of a day off. I intended to take it tomorrow and use it to work on solving the case that seemed to be happening in my own house. Come bedtime, I attempted to pick up where we left off the previous night. To my surprise, Stella begged off, saying she was not in the mood. That sent wheels spinning in my head. Was she out of the mood because she was already done it earlier today? Would I find another sack of condoms? The next morning after Stella left, I made another foray through the trash bin. This time I struck out. Not a single condom. My next stop was the camera base station to watch what had happened in our house yesterday, which was Thursday. There was a short recording made by the device in the living room and a longer one made by the similar device in the guest bedroom. I sat down and watched my marriage crumble. The video began by showing the living room. The first thing of interest was when Stella answered the door a little after 1 p.m. She let a couple of guys in, kissing them as they entered. I was able to identify the guys immediately. They had visited us during the summer. She had introduced them to me, and we had spent some time in casual conversation. Later, she had taken them out for a swim in our pool. I had suffered some cuts on my arms and chest during an arrest that week, and some of the wounds were still bandaged. I didn't want to get the bandages wet or risk getting an infection, so I stayed inside and watched some sports on the tube. I didn't give them a second thought, and I certainly didn't suspect any hanky-panky. After all, those two guys were her cousins. Back to the living room. It was only a few minutes into their conversation when I heard them reminiscing about their swim in our pool, the very thing that I had been remembering. Stella recalled that they had carefully hidden out in an area of the pool that wasn't visible from the windows. One of her cousins remembered that she had given them BJ. Then she recalled having to obtain a morning after pill at work to make sure she didn't get pregnant. As I said, I didn't suspect anything back when it happened. I still have some trouble wrapping my mind around that episode. Did this just start in our pool, or had they done this before? Were they getting together when Stella and I were dating? Something just doesn't compute. Not that it matters, they're 3 consenting adults, one of which just happened to be my wife. Their conversations revealed some further information of interest. The cousins were now attending the state university about 50 miles away. After I heard them mention it, I remembered them talking about it when they were here for their swim fest turned sex fest. Neither cousin had classes on Tuesday or Thursday afternoon. That explained a few things. First, I now understood why Stella had suddenly changed her work schedule this fall. She used to work 4 10-hour days, Monday through Thursday. She had changed to 3 10-hour days which fell on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Then she had 2 5-hour days which fell on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She said the changes were mandated by management, but I suspect it was all done at her request. She was home by noon on the days her cousins would be visiting. That explained a lot. I thought that conversation in the living room was bad until I saw what happened in the guest bedroom. I'm not sure orgy is a strong enough word to describe what I saw. First, they helped each other undress. Then they started some intense foreplay on the bed. One of the cousins pulled a handful of condoms out of his backpack. I was surprised when Stella said, "I have some good news for you guys today. I've been on the pill for 10 days. Now, it's safe for us." One of the cousins remarked that he thought she was trying to have children. She said, "Jake and I are officially trying to get me pregnant, but I've put that on hold for obvious reasons." "Is Jake all right with that?" they asked. "He has to be since he doesn't know. He would be furious if he knew I was on the pill. If he found out, it would lead to some questions that I'm not prepared to answer. I don't think I could live without what the 3 of us are doing, but I don't want to lose Jake and my marriage either. This way, what he doesn't know won't hurt him." She went on to bemoan the fact that I seemed to be noticing a difference in her behavior. She mentioned that the last time we had sex, when we finished, I had just headed straight to the bathroom. The time we used to spend in a loving afterglow had disappeared. She admitted that she had enjoyed the afterglow as much as the sex. She missed it. She went on to mention that she had been avoiding marital sex on Tuesdays and Thursdays by claiming that she was not in the mood. That was true. For one thing, she was already completely satisfied, but she also didn't want to risk me noticing something that she somehow had failed to hide. She admitted that I was visibly upset by her refusals. She'd never refused me before she started participating in those cousin encounters. Then she mentioned that recently, I didn't even try to initiate anything. She said that worried her. There was a lot of sexual activity on that video. They did everything imaginable. They seemed to like that one even more. In both of those positions, each cousin was able to screw her. I must admit, it sickened me. There was very little conversation when they got seriously into their fornication. Of course, fornication to them is adultery to me. One would think that watching those multiple couplings in that video would be the primary event leading to the end of my marriage, and that certainly played a big part, but it was the afterward conversation that sealed the fate of my marriage. Some things that she said drove nails in the coffin. After watching the video, I called a divorce attorney. I was able to get an appointment for Monday afternoon. I avoided Stella in every way possible all weekend. She made several attempts to get me interested in her sexually, but I didn't bite. There was no kissing, no cuddling, and no pillow talk. I was through trying to save a failed marriage. Finally, she decided to take the bull by the horns. She said those 5 ominous words, "Honey, we need to talk." I was ready. She started by saying that she knew there was something wrong. I was no longer kissing her, let alone having sex with her. "What have I done?" she asked. "It sounds like you're feeling guilty about something," I answered. "I feel bad about whatever has turned you away from me, but how can I feel guilty if I don't know what I'm guilty of?" she retorted. "Well, you think about everything you've been doing, say for the last several months. If you can identify something that might bother me, we can talk about it. If you can't think of anything like that, then it must be my fault. Answer me this, Jake. Is there something bothering you? Have I mentioned anything, Stella? Have I said anything to make you think something's bothering me?" I queried. "No, but it's what you haven't been saying and your actions that tell me something is wrong," she sobbed. "My God, woman, you just admitted that I've said nothing to indicate that there is anything wrong. I asked you to search your mind for something you've done that could bother me, and you came up with nothing. It appears to me that we are in some kind of crazy standoff." With that, I left the room and she kept sobbing. We continued to just coexist in the same house until we went to work on Monday. I took an extended lunch period to talk to my attorney that afternoon. I took the video and my evidence cooler with me. After viewing the video, he said we were in the driver's seat. Our state allows filing for adultery. "The video proves adultery beyond any doubt," he stated. He took the condoms from my evidence cooler and had his assistant take them to the lab. That would give us even more proof. He indicated the settlement would be a piece of cake. He said that the papers would be ready by Wednesday. It was decided that I would personally serve her at home. As much as I hated what she did, I would take no pleasure in humiliating her at work. I thanked him and left. I guess I should have been happy to be getting rid of the witch, but that wasn't what I was feeling. I felt betrayed, confused, and an all-consuming regret. I'd loved Stella with my whole heart, but I could never forget the words she had said on that video. When I got home Monday evening, Stella was as nervous as 3:04 in church. She apologized for not having anything for supper. I just grabbed my phone and ordered pizza. She said, "I'm sorry, Jake. I'm just so upset. I barely made it through work today. I'm a wreck. Please forgive me for whatever I did to upset you so much." I said, "We talked about this, Stella. As I remember, you can't think of anything you've done that should bother me, and you don't recall me complaining about anything. I think we gave up on that. But Jake, you're treating me like shit. Please tell me why. When have I treated you badly in any way? You don't touch me anymore. It's like you don't love me and don't want to have sex with me." "I don't remember it that way, Stella. I remember making moves and being stopped cold when you told me that you were not in the mood. It happened last Tuesday, the Thursday before that, and the Tuesday before that. Maybe you can't handle those 5-hour workdays. I would have thought you would be rested and eager to get it on, but what do I know? One thing I know is that you never told me you were out of the mood ever before during our marriage. Not until you started working those 5-hour days. Now, let's turn to your 10-hour days. You allowed me to have my way with you, but you were somewhere else. It was all one-sided. It was more like you were doing your duty instead of participating in the ultimate act of love. I don't want more of either thing, so I just avoid it. I don't want to risk being hurt and emasculated by you anymore. What are you saying, Jake? Are you through with our marriage? Are you through with me? Are you going to leave me? All of that depends on you, Stella. It all depends on you. How can I do anything if you won't give me a chance? You treat me like a roommate, not a wife." She began to sob. I turned, walked to my chair, and began watching a news program on PBS. She sat in her chair and watched with me. Her phone rang. She said, "Honey, I have to take this." She walked to our bedroom and shut the door. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I knew I had it covered with my altered smoke detectors. I connected to the base station with my laptop, grabbed my headphones, and began to listen to her conversation in real time. She was talking to her cousins. She asked if they had her on speaker and if anyone else was with them. They affirmed that they both could hear her and that nobody else was there. She said, "I have to call this off. Jake is behaving very strangely. I don't know what he knows, but he knows something." "Are you sure that he knows? Maybe he just suspects something. It doesn't matter. Either way, he has cut me out of his life. We are just roommates instead of husband and wife. He doesn't touch me anymore. I need to call it off." "Okay, we'll skip tomorrow. Maybe things will be better by Thursday. You don't understand what I'm saying. I'm not calling off tomorrow. I'm calling off the whole thing. You know that won't work, Stella. You've said it yourself. You live in two different worlds now. You need both of them. I thought that was true, but one of those worlds is falling apart, and I need to put it together again. That's what I have to do. Everything else is expendable, but not my marriage. Don't show up tomorrow or any other time unless you call ahead. You can visit anytime, as long as Jake is here and able to swim. I have to admit that she seems to be trying to apply the brakes. Sometimes, however, doing the right thing too late is just that, too late. When I got back from lunch on Tuesday, I got a call from Stella. She told me that she was not going to be leaving early anymore on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She had told her manager that the new schedule was not working out for her, and he had changed it back to 4 10-hour days, Monday through Thursday. She just needed me to know not to expect her to be home when I got there. I said, I thought you told me that management had mandated that change. I'm surprised they would change it back at your request, especially so quickly. I was surprised too, she answered. I thought that perhaps they recognized how upset I was, but that wasn't it. They said they'd been thinking about changing back for quite a while. My request just speeded it up. Well, I'm glad it worked out. Thanks for letting me know. After we hung up, I began to suspect this could be a cover for moving the orgy to another location. Maybe that phone call last night was a setup too. I knew what to do. I placed a call to her company phone. She answered on the second ring. I could hear Mary and June talking in the background. She was at work just like she said. I recovered quickly and said, I forgot to ask, do you want me to get some carry-out for us tonight? That would be great. Thanks for thinking of it. No problem. See you later. It seems like her lying has turned into truthing, as the song said. On my way home, as I passed Marcy's gift shop, I noticed a pretty plaque in the window that read, Avoid even the appearance of impropriety. I pulled over to take a closer look. As I was examining it, Marcy herself came over to wait on me. It was probably because I was in uniform. She had obviously read my badge when she said, There's quite a story behind that piece of merchandise, Officer Robbins. I told her I liked it because my boss, Sheriff Stevenson, often stressed that very point at our meetings. I said that it would be a nice touch to place it in our conference room. Marcy told me that she had picked up 4 of those plaques from one of the full-time flea markets that she attended regularly. She said, the owner told me that she remembered the lady who sold those plaques. She'd bought them just a few weeks before, and here she was, doing a sellback with tears in her eyes. Anyway, for those of you that remember Paul Harvey, Marcy told me the rest of the story. Here's what she said. The woman that was selling the plaques was named Janet. She had been happily married to Brad. She met Steve at a conference that was hosted by the company she worked for. Steve was an Army captain. As it turned out, the two of them ended up working together on a conference-related project. As their project progressed, they became good friends. They had lunch together every day. When Brad saw them having lunch at the Hilton, he warned her to stop seeing Steve outside of the office. She ignored that warning. In fact, not only did they continue to have those lunches, they even took a couple of day trips together. It soon began to look more and more like an emotional affair. After the conference ended and Steve had left, Brad was still upset. He initiated a confrontation with their children present. Janet swore that the relationship never became physical and that she didn't commit adultery. She didn't realize that Brad had hired a private investigator. Between what Brad picked up on his own and what he learned from the PI, he was certain that, at the very least, Janet had an emotional affair. Most likely, it was an adulterous affair. Either way, Brad couldn't trust her anymore. That ultimately led to Brad accepting a foreign country assignment with his company for a month. He intended to use that month to think about Janet and his marriage. He needed some time alone to digest what he knew and choose what course of action would be appropriate. Luckily, their children were both in college. They might be upset if his decision led to divorce, but they would understand. While Brad was away, Janet happened to pass a gift shop and she saw 4 plaques there that displayed a very apropos message. Avoid even the appearance of impropriety. In the deepest crevices of her mind, she admitted to herself that while she didn't have a physical affair, she might have had an emotional one. If she followed those words of wisdom, she could avoid such a problem in the future. She bought all 4 of the plaques and placed them in strategic locations in the house. One was on the wall at the foot of her bed. It was the first thing she saw every morning and the last thing she saw every night. Unfortunately, those plaques never became useful. She received a call from Brad a few days before he was due to come home. The call was nothing like she expected. Brad's first words to her were, "What are you playing at? While I'm over here trying to figure out how to preserve our marriage, you're still pursuing your affair." She said, "What are you talking about?" I haven't been in any kind of contact with Steve since he left. He was scheduled for duty in Europe. He's there by now. That's one hell of a long-distance affair, Brad. There was no affair before, and there's certainly no affair now, she sobbed. He answered, Janet, I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. I decided to get an update on your captain before I made my final decision about us. I'm surrounded by military troops here, and I know some pretty influential officers. I asked the question, and they got me the answer. Your captain didn't go to Europe. He went to Fort Hood. So, let's see, he's about an hour's drive from your house. How often does he make that drive? How often do you? She wanted to tell him that she didn't believe what he was telling her and that she had never made any drive and neither had Steve, but Brad raised his voice and dominated the conversation. He didn't allow her to interrupt. He said, Janet, I've accepted a permanent position here. I've filed for a divorce. I'm asking for a 50-50 split of our assets, except for your car and the house. You get those outright. I don't think you can get a better deal than that. Go see your captain and celebrate tonight. Sign the papers when they arrive. With that, he hung up the phone. After a long cry, she called the personnel department at Fort Hood. Brad was right. Captain Steve Snow was, indeed, stationed there. He'd been there for a few weeks. Before long, she was making that drive and so was Steve. She also drove back to that gift shop and sold back all 4 plaques. She was doing the only thing possible, but she still had tears in her eyes. It marked the end of something good that she failed to protect. On the day that her divorce was final, Steve's ring replaced Brad's on her finger. It was goodbye, Brad. Hello, Steve. She had insisted on waiting until her marriage was over so tonight would be more than special. Now that Brad was officially out of her life, she resented that he didn't believe her. She could have been crawling into bed with him tonight instead of with Steve. It was Brad's call, and he made it without giving her a chance. She didn't need a plaque to remind her of how fragile marriage can be. She would heed that message and do everything possible to protect her second chance for a long-lasting union. When she finished the story, I thought Marcy was going to cry. I asked her if there was a story behind all of her merchandise items. She said there probably was, but she didn't know most of them. I picked up one of the plaques and handed her my credit card saying, I'll take this one, Marcy. It will be perfect for our conference room. She pushed my hand away saying, Your money is not good here, deputy. I shook my head saying, I don't want to start by violating the message on this plaque. I'm paying for it, Marcy. She reluctantly accepted my card. When I got home, I hung the plaque where it would be seen by anyone entering our front door. That would be Stella in about an hour. In the meantime, I connected my computer to the big screen TV in the den. It was time to shine a bright light on the darkness in our marriage. It was time to pull the plug, but first, she needs to know what she's lost. When she got home, she saw my patrol car in the driveway. As she flew through the door, she was saying, Honey, you're home early. I saw her in the hall. She was staring at the plaque. It was like she was frozen in place. Her face was the picture of worry as she pointed at the plaque and asked, Did you get that for me? I told her it was a favorite saying of my boss. I told her it applied to me, and yes, it applied to her. Then I asked, Would you be interested in eating out tonight? She said that would be good. She just wanted to change out of her work clothes. She asked where we would be going, but I told her it was a surprise. I knew this would be our last night out together. I had made reservations at the steakhouse where I proposed to her. You didn't just drop in there, so she wouldn't suspect that we would be going there. It would be a surprise. A good surprise, but far from the last surprise that I would spring on her tonight. Yes, she was pleasantly surprised. We talked about how important this place was in our past. That led to reminiscing about so many things that meant so much to us. As our conversation continued, I had trouble maintaining a good mood. I knew it was all ending, but she didn't. She seemed to sense a change in me. She began to look worried. By the time we left for home, she looked scared. When we got home, I suggested that we watch a movie in the den. That seemed to relieve some of her anxiety. She popped some corn while I chose the movie. We sat together on the love seat. My computer began feeding video to the big screen TV. The first scene featured the 3 of them talking on the bed. They were all naked. She was telling them how good it had been since they'd stopped using condoms. My eyes left the video and focused on her. She looked like she was in shock. She kept saying, Oh God. Oh crap. No, no, no. Not this. Turn it off. Honey, please stop it. I had inserted stop points several places on the video. I decided to skip the foreplay, BJ, and sex acts. I skipped right to the beginning of the activities. At that point, she rushed to the TV and pulled the plug. She said, I know it looks bad. It is bad, but not for you or our marriage. It's not cheating. Cheating is destructive because the cheater is moving away from their spouse. I'm not in love with my cousins. I'm sure you know in your heart that there's no danger of me leaving you for them. As bad as you think this is, it's just sex. It's not even close to love. I'm sure you realize that it's no threat to what you and I have. I love you more than ever. I've been your wife in every way while this was going on. I yelled, have you really? How about all those times that you told me you were not in the mood? You never did that until this cousin thing started. I did that out of respect for you, honey. I didn't want to be second. I made sure of that. It was from respect. Are you trying to convince me that those orgies you've been having won't hurt our marriage? Even if I could ignore those perverted sex acts, I can't ignore the words you said. It's what you said afterward that doomed us. Don't you think that sex is an important part of our marriage? Don't you think I put a high value on pleasing you sexually? Of course, Jake. I know that sex is a big part of our marriage. Our sex has always been great. You've always been a great sexual partner, honey. You should never doubt your sexual prowess. I sure don't. I told her that I knew she was lying to me. While she continued to say how much she enjoyed sex with me, I advanced the video to the last stop point. It showed the conversation that occurred following the sexual activities. Stella was speaking. You guys have ruined me for sex with Jake. After what we do, sex with him is just boring. He doesn't excite me anymore. Sex with him is more like inadequate foreplay. I've had to fake with him since I've been with you guys. When I'm with him in bed nowadays, I just try to get it over with as soon as possible. I'm trying not to mess up and reveal how uninterested I am in sex with him. Poor Jake. I think he perceives that all is not well. Our last time together, after my first fake, he wanted to try again. I try to go straight into afterglow. I still like the afterglow. It helps me show him how much I still love him. He was adamant about another round, so I faked again. When he was done, he just got out of bed without even 1 minute of the afterglow that I have always cherished. I think that I need to become a better actress. I'd better kick it up a notch with him. It will be difficult to fake an intense reaction to such sex, but I need to do it. If I don't, I could lose Jake. I can't let that happen. Her cousins asked her if she was sure that I would not be interested in joining them. She said, I've told you guys over and over that my husband is not into any type of quirky stuff. He doesn't approve of unconventional sex. He would never condone what I'm doing, let alone participate in it. He can never know about us. The minute he knows, I can kiss my marriage goodbye. I turned to Stella and said, you knew how I felt about sex acts, but you did them anyway. To me, our sex life has always been a big part of our marriage. So now you say your unorthodox, freakish, offbeat activities have overshadowed and ruined your enjoyment of sex with me. The sex you share with me can't meet your new expectations. How do you think I can stay in this marriage knowing how you feel about my lovemaking? In the future, every time you deign to have sex with me, I'd be thinking about what you said. Those words will never leave my mind. Well, don't worry about faking it with me anymore. You won't have to. With that, I opened my briefcase and handed her the envelope containing the divorce papers. I said, you've been served. It's a typical equal split document covering everything we've accumulated together. Nevertheless, you should hire an attorney to protect your interests. From now on, the discussion should be between your attorney and mine. Movers took all of my belongings away while we were having our last supper. So the impediment known as Jake has now been removed from your life. I will no longer be between you and your lovers. I won't disappoint you with a goodbye kiss. Enjoy your freedom to screw whomever you please. Goodbye, Stella. As I walked to the door, she ran and grabbed me around the waist in a bear hug. She sobbed, I didn't mean any of those things about sex with you being boring. I've already put an end to what I was doing. It's over, honey. It's never going to happen again. I continued to walk toward my car, dragging her down the sidewalk. She wouldn't let go. Our neighbor, Sally, ran over and asked what was happening. Stella started telling her we were having a rough patch. As they conversed, I used that opportunity to run to my car and take off. I saw her in my rearview mirror. She was running after my car and waving her hands. I turned the corner and she disappeared from my view and my life. Stella tried twice to interact with me. She came to my door once and said she had an idea of how to get us back together. I said, don't waste your breath, Stella. She left crying. The next encounter happened after the divorce became final. I was in my patrol car stopped at a red light. She pulled up in the next lane. When she saw that it was me, she waved. I ignored her. When the traffic cleared some, she hit the gas and sped across the intersection. The light was still red. It was all I could do to keep from turning on my lights, stopping her, and writing a ticket. The cop in me wanted to do it, but the ex-husband in me didn't want to be forced to talk to her. The ex-husband won. It was the first anniversary of our divorce becoming final. Kelly and I were sitting by the fireplace having some popcorn and watching a Netflix movie. She's a social worker. Our paths crossed professionally several times on cases that fell in our shared purview. It was when we both volunteered to serve holiday dinner to the underprivileged that we got to know each other. When we finished serving, we along with the other servers sat down to have our own dinner. Since we had been working together, we decided to eat together too. Our conversation was very pleasant, and we discovered that we had lots in common. That conversation led to dating. Dating led to love. As of now, we are in an exclusive relationship. After our movie ended, there was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw a courier from Acme Services. We use that service at work, so when I answered the door, I assumed that it was a work-related delivery. After signing for it, I saw that it was from Stella. I opened it and began to read. Jake, for the last time, I want to say how sorry I am for ruining our marriage. When you were leaving, I told you that I had ended the episodes with my cousins, and I had. When you drove away, I was devastated. I began sinking into despair. I knew I had to snap out of it. My way out of that morass was to call my cousins and tell them I was ready to resume where we left off. They informed me that they had already set something up with a witch named Frida. Then they surprised me by saying that she would be happy if I joined them. I told them that I had never considered performing sexual activities with another woman. I thought about it for a couple of minutes before I said, "What the hell? I'm up for trying anything." After the sale of our house, when I moved to an apartment, I began to realize how much I had lost when you left. While I was living in our house, I was able to convince myself that you would eventually walk through the door. When I moved to an apartment, I knew you'd never be back. I began to lose interest in the team. I began to see it for what it was, utter depravity. I finally resigned from the team. Actually, I was fired for failure to perform. Anyway, it ended. You know, if I had paid more attention in English class, I could write a book or at least an article about what I've learned. First, the old saying about nipping things in the bud is right on. I should have stopped it at the start. I should never have allowed that debauchery in our pool. Before that, I was completely satisfied with our sex life. That all changed in just a few minutes in our pool. A fantasy was born, and it invaded the very center of my mind. Never to be repulsed or conquered. Truthfully, at that very point in time, my ruination became inevitable. I had to have more. When I got more, it was never enough. I lied to you when I said that I didn't mean those things I told my cousins. Those words that bothered you so much. I'm ashamed to say that what I told them was the unvarnished truth. I meant every one of those words that you hated. I was deep in the bowels of hell, and there was no way back. My marriage was over. My life was over. I would never be a wife again. I would never have a baby to love. No little bundle of joy will ever call me mommy. It's all gone. There's no way back. The only way out is to never get in. There is another old saying that applies to us. It is as wrong as the previous one was right. It says, actions speak louder than words. That's bullshit. It wasn't what I did that resulted in a marriage beyond repair. It was what I said. It was those words that were stamped indelibly in your mind that sealed my fate. We could never return to normal as long as those words stood between us. Words matter. I'm leaving everything, both good and bad, and going away. I will never darken your door again. You will never have to look at the 304 that your wife became ever again. If I could go back and change everything, I would do it in a heartbeat. Life doesn't work that way. I wish you all the best. I hope if you ever think of me at all, that you will only remember the good times. We had it all, Jake, until I destroyed it. In the process, I destroyed myself. Finally, it is with much recently gained appreciation, respect, and yes, abiding love, that I bid you goodbye forever. Stella. Kelly was reading over my shoulder, and she became concerned. She turned to me saying, "You know what this is, right? It's a suicide note. You can't let this happen, honey." I took her hand and declared, "I'm completely out of the picture and I don't want back in." In the enduring words of Rhett Butler, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.